Hey everybody, this is now round 3 of the follow-ups for the When the Levee Breaks, drum sound recreation video. And I think for good reason. There's a bunch more really great comments and thoughts and questions that have brought in amazing new evidence that I think is really starting to pin down what really happened on this recording. It's really incredible. It's one of the things I love so much about this whole YouTube thing and doing these videos, and the whole community that's around this is like, I would have never figured any of this last stuff out without the help of you all. So thank you so much for taking interest in this and doing, a bunch of detective work of your own and offering up other information, because I think we're really actually figuring this out. It's kind of incredible. It's amazing what you can do when you have like a bunch of people really focusing on something. It's just a whole different level of resource that gets put into this thing. So that's awesome. And so I'm going to go through all this new round of comments, questions, and stuff, and that'll sort of walk us through what the new evidence is, because it's super interesting. And I have a session. I imported this stuff so we can all check out what this is, and I think we're all going to agree what's going on here. It's cool. Okay, so we start with Dan Wah, EL34. His question was, what is the biggest factor that you thought would be crucial that turned out to be a non-issue? Talked about this before. I talked about it in the original video. It was the biggest disappointment in this process by far, was that I thought I knew what was causing the comb filtering, that it was a reflection off of a surface that was close to one of the microphones, the left side microphone. That absolutely is not the case. I think with the new evidence, we'll all agree by the end of this, like, that's not how this comb filtering happened, for sure. That was a complete, fool's journey. I was completely on the wrong path with that. So that was the thing, for sure. I'm so sure I had it figured out, and it was so absolutely not what happened. Okay, so that was cool. Okay, so then next one is username Kenneth John Gilmore. Okay, so having used a real Benson before, it doesn't have an option for hearing only the wet signal. And that is important with ultimately what I think is the answer here. That's a big deal. So, that's correct. And so he's saying perhaps only the left side was being sent to it. And with the Benson being panned in the middle, this could account for the anomaly on that side. I think you're right about this. I think that is what happened. Also, you would then have to balance the right side to account for the level difference, which could contribute to the interesting width, because you're getting one signal that is in the middle and the left side, and then a different signal on the right. Another theory could be that the Benson delay and dry signal was printed to a track on the tape machine, and there was maybe something off between that and the track with the mic on it. So when they are combined, it could have caused some phasing. So this person, Kenneth John Gilmore, you've basically, I think, explained the whole thing. There are other people in here that had the realization. I'm going to try and give credit to everybody that arrived here. But I think we now have information that can prove it. So it's not just a theory. So we'll get there. But yeah, so Kenneth just pretty much laid it out. I'm pretty sure that's what happened, and we'll check it out here. Okay, so then Adam Watts contributes, maybe we need a more surround version of the reflective surface. So he's talking about the surfaces being around the microphones. As I just said, it's definitely not it. I wish it was, but it's not. So having more surfaces around the microphone isn't going to make it any closer to what this is, because I think we have the answer. Okay, so then Dino Alden 568 says, to reinforce your idea of using more reflective gobos, in a previous round I had mentioned that if I could have done anything different, I think I needed more reflective surfaces around the drums, that there was a lot denser early reflection on the original recording. And so they're saying that Spitfire Audio made a drum library at Headley Grange. I watched their making of video, and Roger Taylor from Queen mentioned that he was surprised at how bright that entryway actually was. So yes, hard gobos all around next time. And I watched that Spitfire thing as well. It's pretty cool because you get to hear a bunch of different drummers and mics up all over the place in that space. It is a great sounding room for sure. None of the things that they did really particularly sound like When the Levee Breaks, but you can tell it's just a awesome sounding space. Okay, so then there's something here. This one says, sorry for the unrelated question. Would you ever be able to give some insight or break down one of the songs from the Maroon 5 project you guys did together? Really dig the way that album sounds and haven't heard you speak on it much. Yeah, I only did 2 songs that went on that album because the album was basically done. And there were people involved, powers that be, that wanted them to rework some stuff. And so I got involved with that. But I'd love to. I thought the 2 songs that we did came out really, really cool, and there's a bunch of fun stuff that happened in there. So yeah, I'll see if I can find a time to pull that thing up. We can do a deconstruction of one of those songs. It'd be super fun, and I'll see if I can reconnect with some of them. I think the person that I've maintained communication with the most is James Valentine, the guitar player. So maybe I can connect with him and get him involved. That would be fun. Okay, so then Adam Watts chimes in again, and this is a long thing, so I'm not going to read this whole thing, about drum groove and drum feel. That's really cool. There's a bunch of great information in here. It's very insightful stuff, and I think the thing that I really connected with in what he's describing and explaining in here is this idea of balance and a center of gravity when you're playing drums. That's the thing that I've been, sort of grappling with as I'm diving back into trying to regain my drumming abilities in life here. And balance is a huge part of it. It really came up when I did this Most from the Least thing, where I wanted to, one of the sounds that I really like, Bonham doesn't do it all the time, but occasionally he does a thing where he's pedaling, so you can see my leg there. He's pedaling and playing the hi-hat at the same time. It happens occasionally. It's a very cool part of his sound. So I wanted to do that. And so I'm playing the hi-hat with a drumstick and pedaling it. And when you're sitting trying to play and lifting one of your legs over and over again, because I don't play heel down with the hi-hat. Bonham does not either. I checked. He's definitely bouncing his foot off the pedal the way I do, the way a lot of drummers do when they're trying to get that really like there's where you hear basically the limit of range in the hi-hat banging at the end of the limit, and so you hear the hi-hat come down and then you hear it hit the limit on when the spring pulls it back up, and you get this 16th note effect, this thing happen in the hi-hat. So he's definitely not heel down on the hi-hat. But that means you're lifting your leg completely off the ground all the time, and it can cause weird changes in your balance. And those changes in balance are kind of like everything for being able to play super consistent the way he did and the way a lot of great drummers play. So that, I think, was something that I really connected with in Adam's, what he's discussing about drum feel and stuff. There's really cool stuff in there. I recommend, anybody, all of you, to go and read through that thing. It's really cool. Okay, so then... username at Blashuvek. He said, can you recreate A Whole Lot of Love? I just love how the drums are distorting on that song. Plus there's a snare fill after love part that gets louder, but it sounds like a different performance. Would definitely want to geek out on that song. Yeah, I would love to do that. Don't have to ask me twice to get into more Zeppelin stuff. And I do have some interesting stuff from Whole Lot of Love. I have just a short section of the drums that somebody grabbed at some point that sounds like a good transfer of those drums. It sounds very similar to what's on the final mix, and there is amazing distortion on it. There is now on YouTube isolated drum track from that whole song, which is pretty cool, but the transfer doesn't sound as close to the record as the shorter bit that I had. But I don't know, maybe at some point there's a time to go after that. I would love to. That's such an amazing recording. Okay, okay. So then this was Baseland TV. Here's a link to the alternate UK mix of the song, which can be found in the deluxe version of the album. Okay, this was important, an important part of the new evidence. So Baseland TV, thank you for contributing that. I'm going to pull up the session in a little bit, and we'll see why. Okay. So then username Joe Phillip PI 1378 says, when I listened to the final thing, A/B comparison, in the middle of the video, I thought actually you just have to run the tape a little bit slower, and then you would be 100% there with the original. That's interesting. Another viewer, mentioned that there's this like alternate version of When the Levee Breaks that's up there that's at a different speed. We're going to check that out, and I'll give you my thoughts about this. Because it's another important piece of the puzzle. Okay. So then, username Harihataja9619 says, do you think you could try to play the drum beat in a way where when the hi-hat and the snare are being played at the same time, you would hit the snare drum slightly earlier than the hi-hat? That would possibly get things sounding a little prettier and help the compressor. So it's interesting that you're asking for that, because it's actually sort of the exact opposite. So when I comped this thing together, it just sort of happened to turn out that I liked the sound of the hits where the hi-hat is just a tiny bit before the snare drum, and that's what's in the comp that I made. And there's something about that my ear really likes. It helps the sound of the attack of the snare drum to almost have this sort of like whip crack sound to it. It's something I'm attracted to, and I go after that when I'm editing and choosing stuff. So I did go after that, but you may be right that it is making it sound a little bit different than the Levee Breaks version, because I didn't specifically look for that, but it wasn't as pronounced as it was on mine. So an interesting observation there. Okay, so then username at tutori9506. And this comment is, I don't know how they did things in 1970, but we know the last 30 years in the studio, a drum tech will bring a stockpile of heads, and all drum heads would be changed and tuned. And if anything new showed up, the company would either put the heads that you prefer on, and then your tech would tune it, or your tech would put the right heads on. Again, that's what I've seen over the years. So they're basically saying there's debate about what heads were on these drums, because it was a new drum set that had arrived, and did the drum tech replace the heads, or did they just use what was on there? Because that might affect, what assumptions are being made about what heads are on there. And ultimately, we don't know for sure how this particular drum tech would do things. So we don't know, but it's a good point. So we don't know for sure if this is like Emperor top, Ambassador bottom, or if it was something that was more generic that would come on the drum sets at that time. And there was another post that explained what was common at that time, and it definitely was not an Emperor on the top and Ambassador on the bottom. So you can go back and check that out if you want, but there's still some question about for sure what heads were on those drums. Okay, username at Ringo Skywalker. Definitely for the last 30 years, I'm with you on this. But okay, yeah, so this is another comment about the heads. And commenting about what the previous person said, it says, but from what I'm seeing old late 60s footage like Beatles, Woodstock and such, it looks like if they played, it looks as if they played with what they had until it broke and then replaced it with their personal choices. But I wasn't there, so it's only an alternative view of mine. Yeah, so it may have been more common at that time to just use whatever was on the drums. And then if a drum head broke or it got too beat up, then you'd change it. But, people were not in the practice of just replacing heads, all the time when new stuff showed up. Okay. So this is user at Studio 8 Recording. This person is saying, it definitely sounds like the tape speed was slowed down. The harmonica also definitely sounds slowed down. And yes, reversed. Yeah, I don't know if I hear the harmonica being reversed in there. Maybe I'm missing something. But there's a lot of delay on it, and at times it makes the performance feel like it's reversed. Okay, so yeah, we'll get into this when we hear stuff, but I'm not convinced that this was slowed down. And when you hear what the options are, I think yeah, it's not certain, but I think there's a most sort of obvious conclusion here. Okay, and then this is user Neek U4E. So this is another person that had the realization about the tape machine, the azimuth setting, all of that stuff that's been talked about, and recorded a video explaining the whole thing. It's basically the same ideas that have been discussed about this, and I think they also basically got it right. But you can find their video in the comments section if you just look for username Neek-U4E and hear his explanation for it. But I think he's got it right as well. Okay, so then there's username Row River Ranch 5726, and so this is, I want to ask you how you did the low end bloom thing on the Time song and the whack whack sound on the bass guitar. Just spill some details about that thing. So this is about the song Time that I did with Joe Satriani, and it ended up on Joe Satriani's album Crystal Planet. That was a song I worked on. I talked about it before. Okay, so I think this is all about the bass guitar on that song. So at this time, I was still deep in T-Ride land, and T-Ride had some tricks for doing bass guitar stuff, and I used those same techniques on this particular song. It really was sort of like, me playing drums, me playing bass the way I had on the T-Ride stuff on a Joe Satriani song. And so we had this very bizarre 8-string bass that it was a custom-made bass by some guitar and bass tech that worked for Neil Sean. I had met him at one point, The story about that bass is so bizarre. Maybe there'll be a day when I can tell why I ended up with it, and everything about it was just insane and hilarious. But it ended up being a significant part of the T-Ride sound. And so it's an 8-string bass, and we used to play it like a slap bass, but instead of hitting it with your thumb, I would hit it with a drumstick. And so that's the sort of whack sound that this person is asking about, that they're hearing on that song. Yeah, the whack whack sound on the bass guitar. So it's an 8-string bass being played with a drumstick. Is that thing. And then there's this big, cool, like deep, growly sound that is layered in with the bass for certain sections. You'll hear this big stereo like dark, ominous bass sound, this big grong thing. And so that is a combination of two things. At one point, I sampled these bass notes that it was a bass guitar going through a distorted amp, and I was tapping notes on the fretboard, and then it got pitched down an octave, and it created this crazy dramatic bass sound. And it was a stereo sound, and I can't remember now if I just doubled it, if there was a different hit for each side, or if it was actually mic'd as a stereo sound. But somehow it was a stereo sound. And then that got blended with a sample that I took from a Peter Gabriel album. It was Peter Gabriel's Passion of the Christ thing, where he did the music, the soundtrack for this Passion of the Christ movie. I think that's what it was called. It's an amazing record. God, I love that record. The sounds are incredible. It was just in the peak of when Peter Gabriel was just, his recordings were just inconceivably incredible. And there's this big, it's a very big, dark, dramatic, just grong, like bass hit that happens on that record. And it's exposed enough that I was able to grab it, and I blended those two things together to make that sound. So that's what that bass sound is on the Joe Satriani thing. At some point, maybe we'll be able to dig into that stuff and and check it out. Okay, so then we have username 242 Savagery. And this is, don't know anything about this version, but it claims to be an alternate take and is indeed in a higher key. Okay, so this thing, we're going to listen to this in a second. To me, this is the same take from the band, but it is definitely playing back faster and higher pitch. There's a different vocal performance on it, and I think that's significant as well. Okay, so then there's another one here. This is username RaiKirwan1. Just a random thought. Is it possible it was mixed on a Sound Techniques console? So and then they put a link to another YouTube video. There's this Sunset Sound roundtable thing that they do where folks get together and they talk about the history of Sunset Sound. So I listened, I checked out this episode and got to the section where they're talking about Sound Techniques consoles and Led Zeppelin. And it looks like, by everybody's best evidence, that whatever work was done by Led Zeppelin at Sunset Sound was in Studio 2, and at that time it was a Sound Techniques console. So this mix that was kept from Sunset Sound was not an API type console, it was a Sound Techniques console. Interesting. I don't know anything about those consoles. Never used one, never seen any detailed pictures of what the EQ could or couldn't do. I know nothing about those things. But that Levee Breaks mix is incredible. And when you hear it next to some of the other mix offerings, it's unquestionably the best. Maybe all the other mixes from Sunset didn't work and everybody thought they sounded horrible, as Andy John said, but man, when the Levee Breaks really worked. Okay, so then there's one more thing here. This is username DClownWhite, and they're saying, the deluxe version of the album is on Spotify. Okay, this is the alternate UK mix. Okay, so that's good. These are these three different versions that I want to get into. So I have a session. I have the three versions in here. This is where it gets important. Okay, I'm gonna put on some headphones. Check this out. So there's the original. Okay, here is the UK mix. So you can tell in the UK mix, it's the same delay, and it does have, when you look at the spectrum of the left side, it does have that same comb filtering is going on, for sure. There's something a little different about it that's important, but that much we know. And so, as I understand it, the order of events was the Sunset Sound mix happened first, then the UK mix happened later. But then there's this alternate version. So check this out. And this definitely seems like it was earlier in the process because there's a different vocal take. If you listen to this whole thing, there's different lyrics. He has some somewhat unfortunate lyric choices in there. It's a totally different vocal performance. But the band is identical. For sure, it's the same drum recording, it's the same bass, it's the same guitar, it's the same harmonica. It's just the lead vocal that's different. So check this out. So there's some delay on there, but it's a very different delay. It's not the same delay, for sure. And in the headphones, it sounds like it's a little bit panned to the right, this delay. And look at this. Here's the left side microphone spectrum analysis. No comb filtering. So now we have it. There's a version of the left side of this drum recording, the left microphone, that doesn't have comb filtering. So that eliminates the possibility that this happened from a reflection in the room when it was recorded. That is not how this happened. We are confirmed about that for sure. And so I think what happened is that somewhere along the way, maybe it happened at Sunset Sound because the Sunset Sound mix happened before the UK mix. Maybe they had the Benson Echo Rec there, and they thought, wow, that's a cool sounding delay for this. They liked the delay. This issue that you cannot eliminate the dry signal is now evident. And this signal, I think, got recorded on the tape machine, as people have suggested. And maybe the tape machine at Sunset had the azimuth really screwed up on it, because it's off by quite a lot. And I would also guess that, like, as you're stacking up tracks on your tape machine, the drums may be recorded on some of the early tracks, the drum mics were, and then you'd have bass and guitar, harmonica, whatever. And then they have this delay idea. That would happen on a later track that's further away. And the further apart the tracks are on the tape, the more dramatic the azimuth issues will be. Because, you know, if there's a tilt in the head, tracks 1 and 2, that's not going to be a huge difference in spacing. But tracks 1 to 16, it's a much bigger difference because it's over a longer distance of this angle. They're going to be further apart, and it will exaggerate this problem. And it's a pretty significant. I mean, I've calibrated azimuth on tape machines a lot, and you got to be pretty far off to have that comb filtering happen. It's got to be like way off, you know. And so, yeah, doing it on adjacent tracks, I think, would be difficult. I mean, the azimuth would be so out of whack. So I think the delay was printed on a higher number track, or for some reason, you know, like further away from the source that was being sent to it. And, you know, it's possible that just with the consoles that were available, the way things were set up, that it wasn't convenient to sum the two signals together to send to the delay. And so they just said, oh, we'll just send the left side to the delay. The dry signal is still in there. It ends up on a track on the tape machine. The azimuth is fucked on this tape machine for who knows why, but it had to have been. And when you blend it back in, that comb filtering happens, you know, with the left side microphone. Okay, so check this out. This is even further evidence why I think this is the way it happened. And I think you all got it right with this. So look at the comb filtering pattern on the Sunset Sound mix. And you can see, so the lowest cancellation is at 2K here. When you look at the UK mix, check out the pattern here. It's lower now. So all the comb filtering got shifted to a different frequency range. And that could definitely happen if it's being played on a different machine. So there's an azimuth issue going on with the Sunset Sound mix. And then when they took it to the UK and played it on a different machine where the azimuth adjustments were different in some way, that timing difference between the source track and the delay track, which I think got printed, you know, somewhere along the way, maybe at Sunset Sound, that timing difference is different because it's on a different tape machine now. And so that's why I don't think it happened some other electronic way. Like if it's something that's inherent in the Benson, then it would have stayed the same, but from one studio to another. But because it changed from one tape machine to another, I think unquestionably azimuth is the culprit for this. So, you know, you all figured it out. It's really cool. And then this thing obviously doesn't have it at all because they must have used some other delay or something, because unquestionably the delay is different on this mix. And there's none of it going on. And you really get to hear more what's going on in this room. I want to jump back in because I forgot to mention this. If you look carefully at the spectrum analysis when it's playing, you'll see that the comb filtering is only happening on the dry signal. It's not on the delay. So that, I think, definitively tells us that this is an issue of the delay not being able to eliminate the dry signal. The dry signal is getting duplicated on another track. The azimuth is off. It's causing the comb filtering, but the delay that's on that track doesn't have a duplicate anywhere else on the tape machine, so that doesn't have it. I think that really settles it. That's definitely how this happened. So look at the spectrum analysis. You'll see it when it plays. This all sort of speaks to an assumption that I made early on that I think I really got wrong. Like I had this assumption that just the way Andy Johns talked about it, like I put the mics up in the room, I squashed it with compression, threw some delay on. I thought this all happened in the moment and it was printed that way. Clearly, that's not what happened. This was not a finished drum sound that just went to the tape machine that way. There's definitely mixing and choices being made at these 3 different locations. A different delay at one of them that eliminated the comb filtering thing, different sounding compression, a different balance of the delay. Okay, so obviously a lot of how this drum sound happened after the fact in the mixing. So now the pitch. So here is this alternate mix that's at a faster speed. So it's playing back faster. It's the same performance. It's just playing at a different speed. And so I checked out what the pitch is on this stuff. And so the faster one ends up, the song is roughly in the key of F. And the faster one is just a little sharp of F, maybe by about 30 cents, something like that. And then, okay, so like here it is. You can hear it. So I have this tuned up 30 cents. It's close. Tuning between the guitar and the bass is a little funky. We're in the ballpark. So it's right around there, maybe around 30 cents sharp. Okay, then the final album version, unquestionably lower, and this ended up showing up to be somewhere around like minus 15 cents, but certainly closer. So the question is, what makes sense for them to have actually played this thing? And being that there's a harmonica involved, which you can't tune with a tuning peg, certainly you can bend notes on the harmonica, but it has sort of like a tonal center to it. And my guess is that this thing's pitch is going to be closer to whatever is going to be closer to an F. And that it would be very weird for them to have recorded this thing almost a quarter step sharp with a harmonica playing. I don't know how that would work. It would be very awkward to play to that with a harmonica, And so I think the pitch that's on the final record and the UK mix is closer to really how it was in the room. That this sharper one is a weird anomaly. They were at a studio. Maybe their tape machine was playing fast. Maybe they experimented with trying to speed it up a little bit, at that when they did that rough mix. I don't know why that one is a quarter step faster than, what ultimately was released. But I don't think this thing was slowed down intentionally. It doesn't make sense, with the instruments that are on there and what pitches are being represented at these different speeds. So maybe it was slowed down a tiny bit, and some machines you could do that. I mean, back then they didn't have really precise control over VCO stuff. A lot of times it was just like a knob that you would adjust. The Sunset mix and the UK mix, they're not exactly the same speed. They're close. The Sunset mix is a tiny bit faster than the UK mix. So it's interesting, but my best guess, end of the day, is that this thing was played and recorded very close to an F, and there's not a huge, slowdown happening on this recording. So that's my take. So there you go. When the Levee Breaks saga continues, that's the new evidence. I think we've definitely solved the riddle of the comb filtering and the delay. That part, I think, has unquestionably been figured out. I'll be able to do tests with this with my machines. The one that I have azimuth control on is the Scully. I don't have that on the MM1200. The azimuth is factory set on those head stacks, and all the heads are mounted on a big plate, and you can't change it. But I could play with that for sure on the Scully and see what we get from it. Okay, so there we go. When the Levee Breaks, follow-up part 3. All right, thank you again for all of your interest and detective work on this. It was really, really cool to get more input on this, and I think we're really figuring it out. All right, cool. So maybe we'll do another round of actual recording and see if we can get even closer with all this new information. It makes a huge difference. All right, cool. Thanks. See you on the next one. Bye.